siya lamang. On the other hand, a security officer is a personnel who has been officially designated as such to have access to security information. Klaro po ang kani-kanilang mga responsibilidad. Ang SDO po ang sa disbursement o ang sa pagbibigay ng pera. Ang SO naman, yung security officer naman, ay binibigyan lamang ng access sa impormasyon. To elaborate and para po sa kaalaman ng lahat, under the joint circular, the SDO is personally tasked with the disbursement and liquidation of confidential funds. Ang SDO ang tagabigay ng pera, siya lang under the joint circular. Natural lang po ito dahil ang SDO ang isa sa mga accountable officers or those public officers personally accountable when something goes wrong with respect to the utilization or disbursement of these confidential funds. And this is precisely the reason why kinakailangan may fidelity bond ang SDO. The fidelity bond is there so that if anything happens to the funds while it is in the custody of the SDO, sigurado na may maibabalik pa rin na pondo to the government through the bond and for the security of the taxpayers. Yung head of agency is also personally tasked to oversee the agency-wide use and disposition of confidential funds. Siya rin ang nag-a-appoint ng SDO. Because of the functions that burden the head of agency is also an accountable officer. Sa makatuwid, yung SDO po yung inaatasan ng batas natin na humawak at siguraduhin mapunta ang confidential funds sa naaayon na confidential expenses allowed under the joint circular. Hindi niya pwedeng i-delegate ang custody ng confidential funds dahil siya ang mananagot rito. Hindi niya pwedeng iutos sa iba. Hindi pwedeng ibigay sa security officer. In the case of SDO Edward Fajardo of the DepEd, while he has admitted to having encashed the 3 checks amounting to 37.5 million pesos each, he has also claimed that he did not know or had no way of knowing how the funds were to be utilized after handing them over to the designated security officer. Mr. Fajardo stated that since it was Colonel Nolasco who is the expert in confidential operations, it was Colonel Nolasco who supposedly made the disbursements of the confidential funds in different localities. It begs the question, sino po ba ang totoong special disbursing officer? Kung ang nag-iisang taong pinagdi-disperse ng SDO ay si Colonel Nolasco, kung pagka-encash ng cheque ay agara naman itong inaabot sa security officer. Whatever happened to Mr. Fajardo being an accountable officer under the joint circular? Kung wala siyang slightest idea kung saan napupunta o kanino ibinibigay ang confidential funds? Is his role in this entire process simply ministerial? We beg to disagree. Mr. Fajardo is not just a simple bagman that would withdraw the funds and turn over to the security officer. His role, as material as it is, carries with it discretion. Discretion to ensure the accuracy of the data in the liquidation reports and to be accountable for the disbursements from the cash advances of confidential funds. But Mr. Fajardo admitted that he merely relied on the documents evidencing payments submitted by the security officer. His failure to exercise the standard care and diligence required of and inherent in his function is the height of irresponsibility and is in clear violation of his mandate under the joint circular. At bakit po nangyari ito? Dahil ito raw ang sabi ng head of agency ng DepEd doon na si VP Sara na ibigay ang pera sa security officer. Same case po tayo with SDO Gina Acosta of the OVP. Ms. Acosta also admitted that the utilization and payment of the confidential funds involves her handing over the money to a security officer per the instruction of no less than head of the agency, Vice President Duterte. SDO Acosta also supposedly never knew where the security officer took or expended the confidential funds. She has only testified on the basis of the information supposedly fed to her, without certainty as to who are the actual recipients or payees of the confidential funds, whether they are even actual persons. In the past hearings, it has always been made to appear that Ms. Acosta for OVP and Mr. Fajardo for DepEd would have the most knowledge as the SDOs of the confidential funds. And we have always been made to believe that it would be the two of them who would be able to shed light on the discrepancies flagged by the COA and the other erroneous and false matters po na didiscover po namin through these hearings. Unfortunately, the SDOs themselves violated their own accountability, their own certifications in the liquidation report. with them disclaiming knowledge kung saan or kanino ba talaga pumunta ang bawat sentimo ng confidential funds, they violated a particular responsibility under item 4.15.1 of the Joint Circular, where they are supposed to certify at least two things: na sila ang accountable for the disbursements of confidential funds, and that the expenses were incurred in connection with the agency's confidential activities. How can they faithfully attest to these kung binibigay lang din naman nila yung confidential funds sa ibang tao or empleyado? Basta mangako din sa kanya yung empleyado, halimbawa, nagagamitin yung pera pambayad sa informer or pang-conduct ng surveillance activities. Now let's move on to another reeling discovery na atin din pong na-uncover throughout the hearings. And this is with respect to the certifications issued by officers of the AFP, submitted by the DepEd to the COA in support of the DepEd's utilization of confidential funds for payment of rewards to informers. Matatandaang mahigit 15 million pesos of the confidential funds spending of the DepEd went to payment of reward to informers. This expense item has been flagged by the COA in view of the DepEd's failure to provide sufficient supporting documentation on the success of the agency's own information gathering and surveillance activities. Para po ipaalala sa nakakarami, under the Joint Circular, one of the conditions that must be met in order for an agency or office to use confidential funds to pay rewards to informers is supporting documentation evidencing the success of the information gathering and or surveillance activities on account of the information provided by the informer. Based on the respective accomplishment reports and the acknowledgement receipts submitted by the OVP and the DepEd, the total amounts utilized for the payment of reward to informers is 96,980,000 pesos for the OVP, covering the period from the fourth quarter of 2022 until the third quarter of 2023, and 21,921,000 pesos for DepEd from the first to third quarters of 2023. This is a total of 118,901,000 pesos. Napakarami po sanang classroom, tuition, sweldo ng guro, at iba pa ang pwedeng paggamitan nito. I stress also that this amount of money is just for supposed payment of rewards. It does not include all other things for which confidential funds were spent for. When inquired about the certifications which the DepEd submitted to the COA, former Undersecretary and Chief of Staff of the Office of the Secretary of DepEd, Mr. Michael Poa, admitted to having asked retired Major General Nolasco Mempin to secure said certifications from the AFP as a means to justify the use of confidential funds, despite DepEd not being directly involved in AFP-led activities. This was confirmed by former Education Undersecretary Major General Mempin, who stated on record that the DepEd has not released any single centavo to the conduct of youth leadership summits. The AFP officers themselves admitted that they did not receive any funding from the DepEd. The summits were actually funded by the budget of the Philippine Army and from funds of participating local government units, as conferred by Colonel Boransing. Lieutenant Colonel Panopio also supported Colonel Boransing's statements that they were not aware that certifications issued by them would be used to justify the DepEd's confidential fund spending for informants. We eventually came to know that these certifications issued by Army Civil Military Operations Staff Officers Colonel Boransing, Lieutenant Colonel Sangdaan Jr., and Colonel Magtanggol Panopio for the youth leadership summits and information education campaigns in 2023 only showed that the fact that these events were successfully conducted at the different barangays in their areas of responsibility. This is yet another clear derogation of the Joint Circular. DepEd misleadingly made it appear that the agency used confidential funds for youth training programs, when in truth, it was the AFP and the LGUs which actually shouldered the expenses from their respective confidential fund allocations. There was never any correlation between DepEd's supposed surveillance or information gathering activities with the AFP's successful conduct of its summits and campaigns in partnership with the LGUs. The DepEd took advantage of the AFP, rode in the coattails of the AFP, and misled the AFP into issuing certifications for a project that is not the DepEd's to begin with. And who could forget the many anomalies we were able to uncover with respect to the acknowledgement receipts or documents evidencing payment submitted by the DepEd and the OVP to the COA. With the select few that we were able to highlight throughout the hearings, ay marami po talagang lumutang na discrepancies na ni dapat ipasawalang bahala. We were able to trace the disbursements by counter-checking the dates indicated in the ARs, and we came to know through this hearing that DepEd SDO was able to complete a job that we believe is humanly impossible. An examination of the acknowledgement receipts submitted by the DepEd for the first quarter of 2023 revealed that Mr. Fajardo made disbursements for 38 consecutive days, and for 35 out of those 38 days, payouts were made to at least 10 to 26 people per day and for various purposes. For example, reward payment, incentives, supplies, rentals, traveling expenses, etc. This is something that could not be easily missed because the acknowledgement receipts, at least for the DepEd, have fields where the payees indicate the date they received the payment and their own addresses or location.